online students confirm? So how many of you haven't received handout? So fine. They'll be getting the credit. In the meantime, okay, let us discuss. So first, these are going to be 15 topics we are discussing. Right? So till here you can see we have these important from mains perspective, and they cover from 23rd August to 29th August. So this is a time, right? So for B10 students, to make you simple, PMLE in related provisions, GS2, quality and governance, New India Literacy Program, GS2, governance, Unified Lending Interface, GS3 economy, PM Jandan Yojana, GS3 economy again, Prime Minister's first visit to Ukraine after 45 years, IR, need for permanent regulators in environment, GS3 environment, Prevention of Atrocities Act, GS2 governance again, Vignan Dara scheme, GS3 recently, classical languages, GS1 art and culture, as well as some provisions of quality also. Then microplastics, GS3 environment, Gunti River, GS1 geography, Naya, Bhumi, GS3 recently, this manager GS3 again, Botswana mapping point of view, GS2 IR, in geography also. Then Lakpati Didi scheme or something else, GS1 society as well as GS2. So these are going to the 15 topics, right? So let us discuss first one, PMLA and weight, right? So if you have seen, even in your current affairs handout also that was covered today, PMLA and weight, right? So if you have seen the last 1 year, 1.5 year also, this law was so much in use, right? So PMLA, most contentious law, and recently Supreme Court has said, right? So two things have to be followed in PMLA cases, right? So first let us understand what is PMLA. Prevention of Money Laundering Act, right? So before understanding what is this act and its related provisions, let us understand what is money laundering, right? So before understanding what is the context of this, recently Supreme Court has reiterated, right? So coming to this, I'll explain this later on once you understand the concept. What is money laundering? So when you try to hide the origins of illegal money, right? So you will try to hide the origins of illegal money. You will try to convert that illegal money into legal, and then you will try to integrate that into economy. That is what that means. When you want to make dirty money clean, we call it as money laundering. So that is the concept of money laundering, because this money, in case if you are using that money, which is illegal money, means any money which is not reported to the authorities. Okay, so for which you are not showing tax payments and all, right? So that is what we call illegal, right? So you are rerouting this illegal money into the mainstream economy by diverting it outside the country, by using it in number of transactions and buying luxurious goods or capital assets. And again, the same money is re-entry. There is no money that is changing actually, but you are making dirty money clean. So that is what we call it as money laundering, right? So if you see the origins of money laundering, this concept and the need of bringing a law that has originated almost in 1980s, when in UN, in United Nations, there is a demand by many countries that there is large scale drug trafficking and all happening using this illegal money, right? So to control those activities, right? So any black money or illegal money can be used for drug trafficking, illegal arms and everything, right? So for that reason, most of the countries have asked to bring the international law, right? So in that regard, we have UN Office on Drugs and Crime. UNODC was created at that point of time, and India being a member of UN, when you have an international law, to comply to that international law as a UN member, you need to pass a domestic law in your country under Article 253 of Indian Constitution, right? So you have the compliance to international law. So you have to pass a domestic law saying that using this law, I'll try to comply to that international law. So in that way, to comply to this UN related law, we have passed our own law in the form of PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act in Parliament in 2002. So this is a main act that is dealing with the aspects of money laundering. So what are the main provisions here? So when you come to the provisions of this act, Section 3 of Money Laundering Act, so that is PMLA, clearly defines what is money laundering. As I told you, definition of money laundering is any act, okay, which is where you can say the source of money is actually hidden, you can say, and then you are trying to reroute the same money into the economy by showing it as clean money. So that is what we call as money laundering. So that's the first definition defined under Section 3 of PMLA. Then next provision is there is a provision of seizure and attachment. In case if you find any illegal account, okay, so then you can seize that money at the same time. You can also attach the property proceeds and all, so that can be done. Okay, so that means if any authority found this money is or this particular property is the outcome of this illegal money, with that illegal money they have bought this, or from this particular business they're generating some illegal activity or some illegal money, and then they're again rerouting this into economy. If they found anything, they can seize the property or they can attach the assets related to that particular person. So that is also given under PML. Then there is a provision of bail also that we'll discuss now. Then who is the authority here to deal with PMLA related cases? It is Enforcement Directorate. Okay, so Enforcement Directorate is a nodal agency in India to deal with any money laundering related cases. But here, if you see, the concept of money laundering generally takes place in three steps. So we have placement, second is layering, and third is integration. So these are the three steps generally involved in money laundering. So placement means whatever the illegal money is there, that will be placed again in the form of bank deposits or accounts. So they'll be placing initially, then they'll layer it. Layer it in the sense they'll be changing the accounts, they'll reroute the money from one account to another account, from one location to another location, so that you cannot trace its origin. That's the main objective in the second layer. Then third is integration. Finally, it will again be integrated into the main economy as clean money. So these are the three main steps involved in money laundering. So this concept is very important for upcoming examinations, because last year so much, the government, okay, so it has arrested many persons, ED has arrested many persons using this PMLA allegations and all, and most of the famous political leaders also got arrested, right? So for that reason it was so much in this. Then coming to the actual concept now, we need to understand what actually happens is, in any criminal law in India, there is one consideration that until unless you are proven guilty, you have to be treated like innocent. Yes or no? That's the general objective of Indian criminal law. Any law. That means until unless you are proven guilty, you have to be treated till then as innocent only. But in some specific offences, like PMLA, in general cases, you will be treated innocent until you are proven guilty, right? But in specific cases like PMLA or certain offences like you have UAPA also, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. These are some specific offences where anything done in these cases will be like a serious threat to your country. Because see, this PMLA is not an easy law, because money laundering is an economic act which is not even less than terrorism. It is equivalent to terrorism, because using this money you can do counterfeiting currency and all, or you can supply illegal arms, ammunition, or you can supply drugs and all. Everything can be done. So many organized crimes are running based on money laundering only. So for that reason, government also considers the money laundering equivalent to terrorist activities. So any law in general which falls under specific categories like PMLA or UAPA will have a different provision, right? So what is the thing here is, two things need to be understood once before we understand what is the recent Supreme Court judgment. So in general law, as I told you, any person will be treated as innocent until unless he was proven guilty, right? అతను తప్పు చేశాడనేంత వరకు he will be treated innocent only, right? But in this particular specific clause like PMLE or UAPA, the situation will be reversed. Okay, so the person has to prove that I'm innocent. Till then, he will be considered as guilty. Okay, complete reversal happens here, right? So here the person will not have any burden of proof. The burden of proof will not be on this person. Who has to prove normally the burden of proof? The prosecutor has to prove it. But in this situation, it is the person who was accused of the charges. He have to show that I did not do this crime. I am completely innocent. I am not involved in this crime. So it is a burden on that particular person in specific offences like PMLE. That's a thing you have to understand. Then in general provisions, what actually happens is bail is the rule and jail is an exception. So these two are the main important pillars of Indian criminal law, right? So bail is the rule. That means until unless he have done very serious and heinous crimes, you cannot deny any person bail, right? Bail is the rule. Jail is only an exception. Only until unless he was convicted, you cannot send him to jail. That's a normal law. But in these cases, it will be the reverse. Bail will be an exception. Jail is the rule. Okay, so generally that will be the procedure, right? Under PMLE also, if you have seen, there is one section. I didn't mention it here. In the next slide, I think just mentioned it. Here, section 45. So this has been dealing with this bail provisions of PMLE. So what happens is under section 45, if any person who was charged under PMLE, if that person has to get bail, there need to be two conditions, right? So that first condition is he have to show that I'm innocent of this particular offense. I'm not involved. And the second thing is when he was released on bail, when he or she was released on bail, they have to show that I will not tamper any evidences further. Okay, so that means even if you release me on bail also, there won't be any threat from my side in the investigation procedure and all. I'm not going to damage or I'm not going to disturb any investigation. If the judge feels that these two conditions are fulfilled and the person will not become a problem in further investigation, then only he has to give the bail. So any judge will he take this much amount of risk to grant bail if these two conditions, can we say that like for sure these two conditions will be maintained, right? That is the reason most of the judges are denying bail under section 45. They're not granting bail under section 45 of PMLE. So what is happening? General law, bail is the rule, jail is the exception. But what is becoming in PMLE? Bail is the exception. In normal situations, not in PMLE also. That is what Supreme Court has said. If you see in the judgment, the situation has changed. And what Supreme Court said? Even here also, bail is the rule, in jail is the exception. But what political parties are doing? They're doing the reverse here, right? They're ensuring that bail provisions are becoming more stricter. But in Indian criminal law, bail has to be given. That's the main thing which Supreme Court has marked. Even in PMLE also, the persons who are arrested, right? So they have to entitled to get bail. That's the main thing Supreme Court has highlighted. Okay, you cannot make more stricter the provisions of getting bail and all. If you are doing so, that means again you are compromising that person's right to life, right? So what is the main thing the Supreme Court said here is this case, you know, with respect to Kavita of BRS, right? So when she was asking for her bail petition and all, so this was a remark passed by Supreme Court. So what the Supreme Court said? So once the inquiry, everything is done, so now there is no procedure going on. What is the purpose of again keeping her in custody? Right? After all the inquiry is done, you don't know whether she was convicted or accused. So if she was accused, now she was accused. In case if she gets acquitted in the future, acquitted means if she was not proven guilty, right? What can you do in future? You cannot do anything, right? Till then you cannot keep her in jail. If you keep her in jail, that is a violation of all her liberties, personal liberties and all. So that is the reason Supreme Court said you have to grant bail. And then previously when she has applied for bail, Delhi High Court has rejected because under one section 6 of this PMLE only, there is one provision that in case of any person who was arrested under PMLE is a woman or a sick person or a children, like you can say minor who is less than 15 years of age, they have some exemptions granted. That means if these persons, women, children or sick person was arrested under PMLA, then they can get the bail. So you are making it stricter for other persons, but for these persons you have to generally grant bail. That is what actually that should be done. But what Delhi High Court said is, Kavita, she is an educated woman and all. So educated women know better than what is other persons and all. What is money laundering? What happens if you resort to money laundering and all? So knowing all these things, being an educated woman, how can she commit this particular crime? So that is the reason I'm not granting you bail. That's the opinion of Delhi High Court. So here, Supreme Court said, how can you do that? Woman has to be treated like woman only. She cannot be treated as educated or uneducated person. Okay. So woman has to be Nari Shakti was again upholded. Okay. So in PMLA, even if a woman does the crime also, there is a provision of bail. For men, jail is the only rule. Okay. So again, I know who won. Okay. Okay. Sick ante ఈ సిక్ కాదు SICK, right? SICK, okay? So who are ill persons, okay? So who are not good in health. So for them it is, okay? So that's the main thing, right? So in these two situations also that she said, like when she has opposed against Supreme Court said Delhi High Court denying the bail, okay? It's not a correct thing because there is already an exception. Not only this, under CRPC also, Criminal Procedure Code. So in that provisions also there is some provisions. In case if a woman is arrested, they has to be entitled to bail and all. Not only that, you know, under Article 15 Clause 3 of Indian Constitution, some special provisions can be taken in favor of women and children. Okay, so all men keep 15 in your mind. Whatever you do, you have no other way. But for all women, there is a provision under 15 clause 3 which is safeguarding them from any offense. Okay, 15, inequality. Who said inequality? అంటే మీ నుంచి వీళ్ళకి పాస్ ఇస్తారా? ఓల్డ్ స్టూడెంట్స్ అంతా జెండర్ ఇన్ఈక్వాలిటీస్ అనేవి కొత్త వాళ్ళకు నింపేశారా? అదే, right. So is the concept clear? Right? Money laundering and what Supreme Court said in the recent times. So then coming to this concept, okay, so what it is found is, so in this particular case details are not required for this examination point of view. But what actually happened is one of the person who was considered to be witness to this case, his son later turned to be accused, or like you can say approver in this particular case. So with respect to that, means witness son has become approver and then he started saying that this person got involved and all. So what Supreme Court said is how you can make one person as approver. Okay, so that means you might have forced them to become approvers. Whoever, see, generally self-incrimination. So this is most important concept which you need to know from Article 20 point of view, right? Under Article 20, you have Article 21 ex post facto law. That means you cannot apply law retrospectively, right? So then double jeopardy cannot be there. You cannot punish same person for same offense twice. Then no self-incrimination. You cannot compel any person to be witness against himself, right? So that is what the Supreme Court also questioned in this case. How can you compel a person to be witness against himself, right? So he, being a witness, later turned to be an approval. That might be due to influence of investigating agencies, right? Yes or no? So how can you show that they have all been converted as approvers and all when investigation is going on? So how can you show or how can you prove before the court that they have voluntarily converted themselves as approvers or without any influence from the investigating agencies and all? That's the question posed by Supreme Court. So that will not be there. That is the reason if you see any person who confesses between police authorities or any person, that will not be valid. Right? For example, if any person who was accused, if he confessed before the police, they won't consider it to be valid like evidence, you can say, right? Because they have to record that particular thing what the person accused will say before the magistrate only, because police may torture them. You agree to this crime, otherwise I'll do this and all. So there may be some force and other things. That is the reason anything confessed before police authorities or police officers will not be considered as an evidence in Indian law, right? So that is also one thing Supreme Court said. So right against incrimination, protection of fundamental rights under 20 clause 3. You know, this is article dealing with it. In section 50 of PMLA is also talking about the right of investigating agencies like Enforcement Directorate in issuing summons Okay, so when they ask or when they want anything, they can ask for evidences or they can issue summons for someone to attend before PMLA and all. So with respect to that also it said you are going to have limited powers. You are not going to have unlimited powers, or you cannot ask any person to come and go according to your whims and fancies. So that's what the Supreme Court has made. Then inadmissibility of self-incriminatory statements. Inadmissibility means if I say because of torture by the police or force by the police, if I say Nene Chesanu, if I confess, so that will not be considered as the evidence because police may have forced me to confess. Okay, that's the reason it will not be admissible. Inadmissibility of self-incriminatory statements. So this is what Supreme Court has said. Anything said before the police will not be accepted as evidence. Then, so we have seen liberty over incarceration, that means over arrest. So you have Article 21, which is going to play an important role than your rights of arrest. So any person, if he is prolonged in jail, then it will be violation of this Article 21 right to life and personal liberty. Because see, the person who was arrested was not even proved to be guilty, right? He is just an under trial at that point of time. He may be accused or he may be convicted in future. But how can you say till then if you keep them in jails without giving bails and all? So that's a violation of their right to life. So that is why Supreme Court also has upheld liberty will prevail over any other rights. Then interpretation of 45(2). Two conditions will be there. 45 talks about bail, where you have two provisions. One is there has to be reasonable grounds that whoever the accused is innocent. Judge should feel that person who was accused is innocent and he will not tamper any evidences in further investigation. Then the recent times, Manish Sisodia, who was a deputy chief minister of Delhi, right? He was also arrested as part of Delhi liquor case and all. So when he was also granted bail, what Supreme Court said is bail cannot be applied or cannot be taken back according to the investigating officers or investigating agencies. When they want, they cannot apply for bail, or when they don't want, they cannot cancel the bail petitions and all. So in that way, we have this provision. So when such offences happen, there can be some special courts also established because it is a specific economic offence. Some special courts also can be established to deal with such cases, right? So with respect to money laundering, the international level we have Financial Action Task Force also, FATF. Okay, so FATF is also there, which was established in 1989 to deal with terrorist financing as well as money laundering. 37 is the code. The next article we have is New India Literacy Program, right? So this was also mentioned in the news because recently central government has changed the definition of literacy and it has informed that new definition will be adopted. Okay, so for literacy, you know what is literacy? Any person who can read, write, and understand what above 7 years, any person who can read, write, and understand any particular language. Okay, so then we used to consider the person as literate, right? So that's the actual definition. But recently now the center has issued a guideline saying that the standard definition of literacy is going to be changed, right? So they have changed this definition under this New India Literacy Program, which was announced in 2022. So what is the Ministry of Education saying is any person who can read, write, and compute with comprehension. That means identifying, understanding, and intercepting and creating life skills like digital literacy, financial literacy in the recent times. Because if you see, most of the people, although they cannot write, but they are able to transact online, right? So many street vendors and other persons, right? So now digital literacy and financial literacy is playing an important role. So you cannot keep that outdated definition and all. So that is the reason. So central government has updated the actual definition of literacy and it has informed the states. So coming to here, they said when you want to say from now onwards full literacy state, that means any state which is crossing 95% literacy will be considered to be 100% literate state. So this program, New India Literacy Program, is mainly aiming at those persons who are above the age of 15 and who are non-literate, right? So because of various reasons, if any person couldn't study at that point of time, right? There is one provision in the article 21A, right? So we have right to education from 6 to 14 years, which is free and compulsory education, right? So you know this was amended in 86th Constitutional Amendment 2002, right? So Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, right? These programs are getting implemented to ensure there is free and compulsory education, right? That means in government schools it is free, not in HPS or Oak Ridge, right? So you cannot ask this, right? So what actually happens is in any person, if we couldn't study at that point of time, and he is considered to be non-literate, okay? So to ensure that they are having these life skills like digital literacy and financial literacy, now this program was announced in 2022 by central government as a centrally sponsored scheme. Centrally sponsored means where center and states together will share the fund. Central sector scheme means 100% funding will be by the center. Central sector means center states will share the funding and states also have to take the responsibility of implementing the scheme. If it is central sector scheme, implementation, funding, everything comes from the center, right? So here if you see, it is a centrally sponsored scheme. It was announced in the year 22 for 5 years almost, and it is having an outlay, means they are going to spend 1037 crores, where center is giving almost 300 crores and states are going to share, sorry, center is going 700 and states are going to share with 300 crores. Okay, that's the concept of central sponsors. Then what is the aim? They have to cover almost 5 crore non-literates who are identified under this age group of 15 years and above. Right? So who are 15 years and above and who are non-literate, those persons will be identified and they'll try to ensure they will get the skills of digital literacy and financial literacy. That's the objective of this scheme. So what are the things that are going to ensure? Foundational literacy and numeracy, numericals and all, right? Then critical life skills, like communication or opening different bank accounts and minimum knowledge, right? Then occasional skills. Occasional means for in which particular field you have interest, right? So those things you can say. Basic education along with continuing the education also, right? So this is what the 5 components which are going to be implemented as part of New India Literacy Program. Then who are going to be beneficiaries and how they're going to identify. Any person who is non-literate and aged to 15 years and above is a person who can get the benefit of this scheme. At the same time, beneficiaries will be identified by the states because the implementation has to be taken care by the states. So they have to conduct door-to-door surveys using mobile apps and all. Then they have to identify any person above 15 who is non-literate. Then the data will be given to the governments and then they'll start this literacy program for them, right? In that way. So there is Diksha program, digital interface for knowledge sharing platform, which is run by NCRT. In online only, they're giving all the knowledge. Like NCRT is also available online. Same way, every information is provided online only. So that's one program of NCRT, right? So this is one thing. Then what are the challenges? So most important thing you have to keep in mind is according to 2011 census, which was a previous census, we have Indian literacy rate standing at 74%, right? In 2001 it was around 64.8%. So this numbers you have to keep in mind until unless you have the new census and updated data. So which is the most literate state? Kerala. Among union territories, Lakshadweep, Andaman, right? Which is the most literate UT? Delhi, Lakshadweep, Puducherry. Is it Lakshadweep or Puducherry? Lakshadweep, Puducherry. Which is the least literate state in India? Bihar. Haryana. Bihar. Haryana is lowest in terms of sex ratio. Okay. So if you see, almost according to 2011 census, 25.7 crore non-literate individuals above 15 age group are there, and out of which you can see these many people are males, and you have 16.8 crore females, right? So that means you can understand. Okay, so then Sakshat Bharat program was also there. So where they're trying to identify, okay, who are the persons, 7.64 crore individuals who are literate, okay, between this age, between this period you can say, they will be remaining, okay, so how they're going to calculate how many people are literate and illiterate, that data will be maintained in, they'll identify under the Sakshat Bharat program, okay. So then coming to government initiatives, before going to that, we'll understand what are the reasons for low literacy, right? So these are the things which can be asked in GS1 society, right? What can be the reason? In general, think it can be lack of financial abilities, right? Although government is providing free and compulsory, then poverty. Okay, then they don't know the importance of education. Okay, then gender bias, very good. Then lack of implementation of educational policies. Okay, then greedy parents. Yes, that is also one situation where they want more hands to be earned, right? So labor, right? That is also one concept. Then, right? So there is absenteeism. You can see teachers, even though there are schools, there is no proper education, teacher training, or absenteeism is also there. Then accessibility is also one thing. Accessibility, affordability, availability. If you remember these three, you can easily write all the things, right? So then how you can counter this? If there is low literacy, you need to take certain measures also. So one thing government of India is doing with respect to improving literacy rate is after midday meal skill program was introduced. So at least for food, many parents are like trying to send their children to the schools because at least one day they are going to get some meal like with proper nutrition, egg or dal and everything, right? So again, that quality cannot be discussed and all, but still that's a thing. At least from the government of India initiative, and states are also implementing their own things, right? We have Anganwadis and all, right? So that is one thing. Then how we are trying to improve the literacy? You can write all the things. Free and compulsory education given by 21 age, 6 to 14 years. Then Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan we have, right? So then stipends we are giving. Then Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, skill trainings. Then incentives also. Any other steps to improve the literacy rate in India? Swayam initiative, very good. Then yes, we are establishing schools also in the remote areas. But still again they won't be very functional. That's the main problem. Then that's it. So then what are the challenges? Why there is so low literacy? We have seen the reasons, and even if we are implementing certain programs, what are the challenges is there is, see, in the recent times it is becoming digital. So most of the people cannot afford cell phone or they cannot have access. So during COVID-19 also it was noticed. Okay. So at least parents should have mobile phone, and even if they have, they'll carry with them, right? So they to work and all. But children staying at home, they need some phone to have access to the classes and all. So that is also creating some hurdles in the learning process and all, limiting their economic mobility also. So, after, like, for example, in a particular village, there is primary school education only. If you want to upgrade to secondary education and all, you need to move out of your town or village. So, many parents are not okay with this, like sending the children out of their village or anything. So, that is also one factor. And low self esteem and marginalization. So, they don't even think we should get empowered or we should get educated at all. So they'll think that for some people of the society, only education is the thing which they have to take care of and all. So they're thinking that our caste or our particular community people should work and we have to earn for ourselves and all. In that way, they try to discourage themselves from getting educated and all. So that's also one of the reasons. Then what are the government initiatives? Nipun Bharat, all these are mainly to enhance your basic education only. So some Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan we have seen, Right to Education Act only, National Education Policy. Under whose supervision this was launched or this was issued? A. Kasturi Rangan. Okay. So A. Kasturi Rangan. So he has recommended this national education policy. This is the third policy. We have the first policy in 1950s. Then in 1986, first time in Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan supervisor, I think we have that. Then later on in 1986, under Kothari Commission, we have national education policy. This is a third policy in 2020, right? So what is the main objective? Some recommendations you need to know. Very important policy. So first thing is for education, which is currently allocated 3.5% of GDP. They said this has to be increased to 6% at least. Okay, 6% has to be the minimum allocation to GDP in education sector. Then they said this 5 plus, 3 plus, 2. Okay, so instead of having this schooling afterwards, intermediate and degree, so they said this has to be ensured. Okay, so this type of education, and they also have given three language formula. Three language formula for education. So it should not be English medium education and all. It should be your mother tongue. It should be English. It should be Hindi. So three language formula, and they also have said gross enrollment ratio. GER we call it. Gross enrollment ratio means it should reach 100% also. See, you're getting enrolled, but many of them are becoming dropouts of the certain age. So one of the factor among the girl child is lack of toilets and proper facilities also of a certain age. Parents are reluctant to send their girls to school and all. So that has also resulted in drop in the gross enrollment ratios in the secondary education system. So they wanted to make it to 100%, right? Then Jan Shiksha Sanstha, so awareness programs and all with respect to education. So these are the initiatives to increase the literacy rate in India, right? Then next issue we have is unified lending interface. So recently RBI Governor Shaktikant Das, he said that we are trying to ensure that there will be unified lending interface. Let us understand what this is. Unified, right? So with respect to lending, we need to have one centralized uniform interface, right? What is the reason is if you see there is UPI, now we need not go to the banks and we need not again ask for any withdrawal and deposits and all. So now we are essentially freely transmitting or transferring the money, whatever that we want from one account to another account. So that is unified payment interface, right? So that is when you want to do certain payments. Same is the concept when you want to lend, right? So if you in the recent times, if you see there are more online lending platforms and all. But what actually happens is when you lend through digital means also, there will be certain data, like who is the person, who is taking how much, and your credit scores, everything has to be maintained. But there are this data, if you see, this data is getting scattered. Scattered in the sense, so central government is having some data, state governments are having some data, RBI is having some data, banks are having some data, private companies or this credit companies are having certain data. So it is getting totally scattered. So you don't know what is the performance or credit score of one person if you want to freshly give him any loan, right? So for example, if you have taken from a bank and if I'm a private company, you are now asking for a loan on online means, right? So how can I retrieve data from the bank? Yes or no? How can I know what is your previous history, whether you have paid or you have paid everything on time or not, right? So that's the main problem that present times credit activities are facing, right? For that reason, what RBI is trying to bring is unified lending interface, right? Like how UPI is there, where you can transact from one bank to another bank, right? Previously, one bank to another bank only you can do, and if you want to transact to another bank, you have to go to your bank. That bank has to approve the transaction and all. So there are certain procedures. But within 1 minute of time, you are transferring any amount less than 1 lakh from one account to another account. So that again, the seamless transactions, okay, that is only there in payment system. So to bring such same system in the lending interface also, this initiative is being brought by RBI, right? So what is this initiative? It was developed by Reserve Bank's Innovation Hub, right? So there is one hub. Then what is the central government's opinion is if you are trying to implement this JAM along with UPI and ULI, this is going to be a trinity in the digital world. Okay, what is JAM? Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile number, right? So Jan Dhan means we'll be discussing that also. Financial inclusion for that reason, we started creating zero bank accounts, right? So zero balance accounts in all. So that is a Jan Dhan initiative. And if you link that with your Aadhaar and your mobile number, we can remove any duplications, right? That's the main objective. If you don't link your Aadhaar, why the central government is always asking you to link your PAN and Aadhaar, voter ID and Aadhaar? Because there can be some duplication also. One person may have different vote accounts, or he can also have different PAN accounts also for that reason. So if you do this, generally we can remove the persons who are duplicating the activities and all. At the same time, you also have UPI, Unified Payment Interface, and ULI. If these three are implemented, it can definitely bring, you can say, a big reform, you can say, in the digital infrastructure, payment infrastructure and lending infrastructure. That is what the government stands. So what will be the benefits if you implement this? So whatever the lending mechanism is there, that will become more efficient, right? So if a person is not paying on time to a bank, if it is turned to be an NPA, non-performing asset, then another person who is actually trying to give loan, he will be aware of this particular thing and he'll try to think about him, right? So whether I have to give a again because the person is not already paying the loan. So if I give again, it may turn to a problem, right? So in the situation, they can have better operational things and all. So efficiency will be there, reduced cost also will be there, and it will also increase the quicker access to credit. Okay, the persons who have a clean score, they'll be getting quicker credit. So in that way, it will be easy, and especially in the smaller and rural areas where the people are not getting good loans and all from the bank accounts and all, it will be a good opportunity for them because everything is operated online, right? You need not have a bank and in the rural area, or you need not have any collateral or something, right? So online means you can have better access. Then it is also trying to address all the unmet demands of the credit. Okay, so whoever are not able to get, that means mainly if you see agriculture sector, MSMEs, right? In India, banks will give only loans to the persons who are very big shots, right? So Nirav Modi and all, for them only banks will be giving the loans. Regional banks, see, that is what you have 35%, 35%, 50%, right? Sponsored banks and all. But what actually happens? How much are they going to spend? The sponsor bank will be there. How much the sponsor bank will actually have it for itself? Then how much it will be given to RRBs, right? The limited availability will be there. RRBs are established for that reason only. But still there is very limited availability of capital in RRBs. For that reason, they couldn't disperse much credit. For what purpose it was established, that was not getting fulfilled. You have priority sector lending concept also, right? It was taught in your economy, right? Priority sector lending. So banks have to give certain amount to certain sectors. Priority sectors like agriculture, MSMEs, renewable sector, housing, SC/STs. Why? Because any person from these sectors, which are very important for the country, are not given enough credit. Okay, so it will again not lead to the financial inclusion. So you will be giving only the loans for those persons who can have good accounts, like in the sense industrialists and all. But if you're not giving loans to agriculturists and all, what happens in future? You don't have even food to eat, right? That's the reason priority sector lending is also maintained by RBI to ensure that there is quick dispersal of credit, right? Then which one? Unmet means which is not fulfilled. Okay. Then it facilitates seamless and consent based. Seamless means without any much problem. So consent based flowing. Okay, so of digital information also will be there. Scattered data entirely will be maintained in the form of a chain or centralized uniform interface so that it will help in moving of the digital information with consent. That means if anyone is going to access your credit score, if you give permission only, that will be done. In that way, consent based digital information also, including land records. Okay, what are the things you are showing as your assets and all, that also will be accessed only with your consent. So these are going to be the features of unified lending interface. Then current challenges with respect to digital lending, or first thing, data needed. As I told you, it was spread across many entities like governments, banks, account aggregators, credit information companies and all. So there is no one proper database which is containing all the credit related data. That's the main problem. Then now it becomes more easy in case if you are facing this problem with unified lending interface, it becomes so easy. That's the main advantage. Then ULI's architecture, if you see, that is having plug and play solution. That means plug and play means what? So you know, in the recent times also we are having plug and play Wi-Fi things and all. So if you are not out of, like for example, if you are out of your home, right? So using SIM cards also you can plug wherever you are there, and you can access that Wi-Fi network. That means seamlessly, okay, without much hassle, you can have this particular thing. Same way, wherever you go, there are easily you can have this credit availability and easier access of information. So then how it is different from UPA? So right, you know, ULI focuses on lending and credit. UPI focuses on payment systems, right? Then users, if you see, your financial institutions and credit entities will be the main things, and here general public will be interacting with the business entities or any others for transfers and all. Integration, if you see, this will be integrating multiple data sources like government, banks, and other things for credit purposes, whereas UPI will be integrating multiple bank accounts for seamless purpose, right? Here entities and here it is bank accounts. So in that way, these two are having some similarities and some differences. Is that clear? The next topic is Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. Right? This was a program launched by the central government. It is a central sector scheme. Means 100% funding from the center. It was launched in 2014. Okay, so now it has completed 10 years of its existence. On that occasion, recently Prime Minister said we are going to extend this program to 3 more beneficiaries. 3 more beneficiaries, right? So what is this Jan Dhan Yojana? Opening zero balance accounts. What is the reason? To include all the people under the financial domain, right? So, for example, if one person, okay, so he's not having a bank account, then what will be the problems? Why government need to spend again? If you want to transfer anything, right? Very good. So, previously, if you don't have a bank account, right? So, to disperse your pension or whatever the benefits that government is giving, that person will take money in cash, right? So, that person who is distributing the welfare program and all, he may like pretend that person like if you want this 6,000, you have to give me 500, then only I'll give you 5,500 or something. In that way, there is some chance of duplication or like any person, okay, commissions and all these things, right? But now, so again, this is the reason why our former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi said, for every rupee that government is spending, right? So when the by the time it reaches the beneficiary, actual beneficiary, only 25 paise is reached. Okay, you can understand. 1 rupee is spent by government, but it is only the 25 paise is actually reaching the beneficiary. That means entirely like how if you take an ice cube, right? If you pass on your hands till the end, what happens? What how much you will be having in your hand? If I start sharing, if I ask you to change your hands, by the time it reaches there, nothing will be there. Same that is what happening in the case of government welfare schemes also. So what is the reason? When people are having bank account, in the recent times we are implementing DBT, direct benefit transfer. That means if you have bank account, I'm transferring all that what I want to pay to you in your bank account. But if you don't have bank account, this problem is there, right? That's the reason why. Again, if you want to open a bank account, and if I ask you to open a bank account, again they have to pay some charges, minimum charges, and you have to maintain certain balance, right? So in private banks it will be more. If you don't maintain balance, they will be penalizing you, right? So, but in private banks, you need to have certain things, like you need to have certain proofs, accounts, and everything, right? So that's the reason many people in the rural areas are reluctant in opening the bank accounts. If they're not having bank account, they're completely out of the financial bracket. For that reason, government has got this in 2014, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana to include. So this was straightly asked in 2016. Okay, what is the objective of Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana? Financial inclusion. Inclusion in the sense to bring all the persons into the financial network. Network means having them into the banking system and all, having them involved. Right, that's the main thing. So for that reason only, if you have seen, even bank nationalization also was done to again promote this financial inclusion. How many times it was done? 1969, 1980. So here 14 banks, here 6 banks. Okay. So nationalization means what? All these were private banks previously. So when they were private banks, you cannot submit, right? So always there is a differentiation between private and public. Public will always work for welfare. Private banks always will work for profit, right? So when you have these all private banks, you are trying to nationalize. Nationalize means you are making them public so that they'll provide more affordable services to the public, right? So in that way, to enhance this concept of financial inclusion only, in 1969, 14 banks were nationalized, and then in 1986, 4 banks got nationalized. This is also one thing which is done to promote financial inclusion only. Okay. So what is this Jan Dhan Yojana? The zero balance account will be opened in public sector banks so that every person will be brought under financial inclusion. So if you have a bank account, It is easy for receiving the funds and all. But at the same time, you can also avail loans and all from the banks easily, right? If you don't have a bank account, you need to go to a money lender. He'll be charging very high interest rate. So you always fall into the debt trap. You never come out of the debt trap, right? So that's the reason. Many other benefits are also there if one person, right? So he can transact easily also money when he deposits in his account. Some another person also can transact. Okay, that way it is easy for them to access. For that reason, it was started. It's a flagship financial inclusion initiative of central government launched in 2014. Then aim is to provide affordable access to financial services such as banking, savings, deposits, remittances. Remittances means any person staying abroad sending his money back to the country. Then credit, insurance, pensions to the unbanked population who are the left population. That means who are not into the financial bracket, like remote areas, rural areas, okay, backward areas. To bring them into the financial bracket is the main objective of financial inclusion. Then it is largest financial inclusion initiatives in the world. So far, you can see objectives, financial inclusion, and access to financial services. What type of services we have seen? Banking, remittances, savings, etc. So, what are the features here? So, zero balance accounts will be created under Jan Dhan Yojana, right? So, then we also have RuPay debit card. When you open a bank account under Jan Dhan, you will be issued debit card also because it is easy for you to withdraw money and deposit with their debit card. Then, overdraft facility. What is overdraft facility? Even if your balance is zero, you can get certain loan in case if you have a bank account, right? That is what overdraft facility. Even if your bank account is zero also, they'll give you certain loan or credit based on your account, okay? That you have to repay later on. That's the overdraft facility available with Jan Dhan Yojana accounts. Then life insurance of 2 lakh rupees insurance also will be given along with the account in direct benefit transfer, you know, right? DBT. So this is one thing. Then what is the impact? If you see financial inclusion by 2024, current year, 10 years, almost 53 crore active accounts were created. That's a very good sign, right? 53 crore persons have opened and then maintaining that account active. Okay. Then women empowerment, almost 55% of the open accounts are women accounts only. Okay. So then rural penetration, 67% of the accounts are in rural areas and semi-urban areas. Okay, that's also another important thing. So these you can write in the concept of inclusive growth, which is mentioned in your economy syllabus also. Financial inclusion and inclusive growth. There you can write this data or any information. Then what are the challenges? So if everything is going on smooth, what is the point of discussion, right? So there are some things which are hurting here. There is dormant accounts. So if you see 53 crore accounts are open, but almost many of these accounts, if you see more than 60% are operating. Rest of the 40% are dormant, means they just have opened, they're not using the account, right? That's the main thing. Then limited financial literacy, but still after opening the account also, many people they have debit cards and all, but they don't know how to use the debit card or how to get that loan or any other things, right? So that's also a problem. And infrastructure challenge. You know, the remote areas, if you have a bank in Hyderabad also, if you have a bank and ATM, it will not function anytime, right? So that's the main problem. Then operational burden on banks. So when you are increasing number of branches through this financial inclusion, burden will be there on the banks also with limited capital. So these are the challenges. Financial literacy. For that reason only they're providing all this new India literacy program and all that. See, government in India, what is not the problem is lack of schemes or lack of initiatives. We have so many, right? But there is lack of implementation. The people doesn't have awareness. So how many of them know that this is existing, right? So you people after so much of education and so much of wiseness also, you are knowing these things here, right? Because you are having certain interest in tracking UPS. Otherwise, why do you bother about PMJDY mentioned in the newspaper, right? Yes or no? That's the main thing, right? So in the 10th anniversary, what finance minister said is, in future we are going to plan to open 3 crore new accounts under this initiative. And RuPay debit cards also, as I told you, 2 lakh accident insurance cover is also being given under this, and it is extended almost already to 36 lakh account holders. Then Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana played an important role during COVID-19 times because it has helped in even safely promoting that DBTs and all. Okay, at the time of COVID-19 because we did not have contact at that point of time, right? Then Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar, Mobile Trinity. So this has actually shaped the financial system of India, right? Because almost 80% of the adults have achieved a very good inclusion rate in the 6 years period of time, right? So this is one main thing you can write even when you're writing how to eliminate corruption and all. You can write this also, Charm Trinity, right? So because duplication, all these things can be removed, right? So in welfare schemes and all, you can write this. Then next topic is the recent times, our Prime Minister made first visit to Ukraine, right? In the last 45 years, it's the first visit to Ukraine by Indian Prime Minister. So in this, not only it's a like diplomatic sign, but there is some sign of geopolitics also involved. So in this, we are going to see what are the main highlights and what is India's stand reflecting from this visit and all. So if you see, main focus is on agriculture and food industry in this visit, right? So, but still, if you see, there is some focus on humanitarian assistance because the Russia-Ukraine war still going on. Ukraine has suffered and all. At the same time, they also promised that we will be supporting some through medicines and drugs because main exports from India to Ukraine are from pharmaceuticals, right? So we have extended our assistance and we have given this Deshmukh Tube source. That means mobile clinics, right? For example, if any person got injured in the war, you cannot take him all the way to hospital and all. So we have given some mobile ambulances or mobile vans type of thing that we call it as Deshmukh Tubes. Okay, so like Bhishma, Bhishma batch, right? So you are the better persons to do. Then India-Ukraine relations. So it all started way back in 1991. Okay, so from then we started having diplomatic relations with Ukraine. Why only 91? Because that is a year when Soviet Union got disintegrated, and Ukraine is also the country that got disintegrated after the fall of USSR. Right? That's the reason. USSR disintegration. Then if you see, with respect to defense relations, we are currently using this R-27 air-to-air missiles as part of Sukhoi fighter jets supplied by Ukraine. Okay, so those missiles are deployed in fighter jets, right? Then trade. If you see, India and Ukraine also had good trade relations, and India is the largest export destination for Ukraine in Asia Pacific region, and major exports of pharmaceuticals. From India, we are exporting pharmaceuticals to Ukraine. Then diaspora, if you see, almost 18,000 students are studying in Ukraine, especially in medical, right? Because medicine in abroad, news channels open yesterday, abroad law MBBS right? Then agriculture, right? Pre-war also, if you see, we have a very good trade in terms of sunflower oil, right? At that point of time also too. Russia, Ukraine, when it started, suddenly sunflower oil prices have increased because we are taking most of the sunflower oil related imports from Russia and Ukraine, right? That's the main thing. Then, what is India's stand reflecting from this visit, right? So, if you see, we want to focus on peaceful resolution, and we are saying always dialogue and diplomacy have to go with each other, right? Then, India is trying to say that we are not neutral, but we are trying to be on the side of peace, okay? But clearly, although we are saying our stand is clearly in favor of Russia, because many a times when there is many resolutions introduced in different platforms, India clearly abstained from voting, right? So because we don't want to annoy Russia, that's the main thing. Because Russia is all-weather friend of India anytime, right? Neeland Medhaval Kalan concept Sadhan Kavu, please leave, right? Then it is not concerned openly with condemning Russia. Okay, so in any statement, India didn't condemn Russia, right? That's again a thing which you can understand. Then emphasize the importance of UN Charter. UN Charter means the law which has actually created UN in 1945. Okay, so we said all the time that peace, security, all these things have to be upheld and all. Then we also highlighted the economic impact of the war on the entire world and especially on the global south. Then we also try to say that two countries have to return to dialogue and diplomacy. So these are the main things that India has suggested from its side. Then can India mediate? Because if you see most of the times, even Zelensky also said, right? So when that means Prime Minister has visited, he made a statement like, in case if India can take the lead and if it can offer mediation to Russia, with respect to Russia and Ukraine, this war can end at this point of time. That is what he has actually asked. But can India mediate? If India mediates, so will it work in favor of India, or will it go against the India's interests, or will these countries accept what India suggests and all? That's the main question, right? In that point of view, if you see, India's role as a neutral player is also in question. Why? Because you already have abstained many votings, right? At the point of time, you didn't take any stand. So then, how you can mediate and which stand you can clearly show? That's the main problem when we wanted to mediate. And although, if you see, again, India already had a successful diplomatic talk with respect to Russia Ukraine when there is an attack on Zaporizhia. This is a nuclear power plant in Ukraine, right? When this is being attacked, okay, there are certain rumors that Russia is going to attack this particular power plant. At that point of time, India has stopped. Okay, it's on both sides in this fight to prevent that particular thing. Because in case if there is any explosion from the nuclear power plant, you know how disaster it would be, right? So for that reason, at that point of time, India has successfully altered, you can say, whatever the attack that was actually planned. Then we also have this Black Sea Green Initiative, right? So Russia and Ukraine, they have that Black Sea border, right? So at the point of time, through Black Sea, most of the grains are passing from Russia, Ukraine to Middle East, Egypt, and all these areas. But what happened actually? These countries like Egypt, Syria, Jordan, they're taking exports of food grains, especially from Russia and Ukraine. With sudden war, what happened? All these countries are having shortage of food grains. At that point of time, war may happen, but still you cannot compromise these needs, right? So for that reason, countries like Turkey, India, UN, they have mediated and they have said whatever the war is going on, you please try to ensure food supplies are going on as usual. Otherwise, these countries may suffer from hunger, lack of food and all. In that way, we have successfully diplomat or like you can say been involved in diplomatic means in negotiating these things. And India is trying to project that we are going to be the leader of global south, right? The concept of global north and global south, right? So that's not on like geographical location, but on economic factors, right? So global north means all those countries who are developed already, right, in terms of economy, GDP based, right? Global south means the countries which are least developed or middle income countries, you can say. Like Australia, although it is in the southern hemisphere, it falls under global north. The differentiating line between global north and global south is called Brandt line. He was the vice chancellor of Germany, not vice chancellor, chancellor of Germany. Okay, so William Brandt. So he gave this concept of Brandt line. Okay, Brandt line is nothing. If you see, this is a world map. Okay, so geographically this is north and this is south. India even falls on the northern hemisphere, but we are part of southern global south because all the northern countries, according to Brandt line, are developed countries industrially, economically. All the southern countries are less developed and least developed countries. So it's not geographical factor; it's economic factor, right? So as we are trying to raise the voice of global south and India being the leader of global south, we need to ensure that we are participating in these things and we are trying to bring the peace in the world, right? Then good relations with Moscow is also there and with the West is also there. So if you take the stand of Ukraine, that annoys Russia. If you take the stand of Russia, it will again worsen our relations with the West. So for these reasons, how India can mediate in a neutral way is a question, right? Then geopolitical aspirations also. We want a seat in UNSC, right? So if you can negotiate and if you can bring this war to an end, definitely that will boost India's image. Yes or no? But still, these are all the troubles which we have in front. To solve this, then only we can have the seat to UNSC in a smooth way. So these are the things which you have to overcome. Then challenges ahead, understanding the dynamics, right? So many countries are taking this stand or that stand. So we have to understand the dynamics and change. The risk taking everything. If you take the risk, either being neutral or taking one stand of either West or Russia, then you are at risk because any country or any side may again cut down your relations, right? So we need this, we need also Russia, both, right? At the same time, cannot afford to slide again have any personal relations with Russia. We cannot take the risk. So what can be the conclusion? You have to be like Gopi Godamilpilli. Huh? No, no. So see, what you can write in the conclusion is as India is trying to establish it as the global leader or global South leader, so we always need to promote dialogue and diplomacy. Okay, so that's the only thing you can write in the international relations. Any conflict has to be resolved through dialogue, diplomacy, and India can take that mediation like that you can write. Okay, so without compromising our interests on either side. Then next topic we have is need for permanent environment regulator, right? So what is this concept is, so you know what is the concept of regulation? Regulation means who will check the particular field whether the rules are complied or not. If any violation happens, they can take some okay power and they can punish also, right? That is what the concept of regulatory bodies. So where you will be studying in governance, different types of statutory regulatory bodies, right? So coming to this, in environment, if you see, there is no uniform regulator, right? So if you have seen here, I have mentioned certain regulators. So these are all environment regulators only. Like you have National Tiger Conservation Authority. This is with respect to tiger reserves and population of tigers and elephants. The recent times, Project Tiger and Project Elephant got merged, right? So in 2023 only they have merged. So that is main job of NTC, only with respect to tigers and its conservation. Then you have Forest Advisory Committee. So if you see, all these are statutory bodies only. This was established under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 in the year 2006. This is an act under which it is a statutory body, it is also a regulatory body in environment. Okay. Then we have Forest Advisory Committee, FAC. This was established under Forest Conservation Act of 1980. Okay. So what is the job of this Forest Advisory Committee? If any forest land has to be diverted for non-forest use, then this advisory committee has to give the approval. That means if you are using forest land for non-forest use, then this committee has to give approval, right? For example, if you are taking the forest land to construct an industry or to develop a particular developmental project, it has to give the approval, right? That's the main job under Forest Conservation Act of 1980. Right. Forest advisory, right? If it is under the forest law, it will be the who will take. Otherwise, if it is normal land, state governments, municipal administration will take the decision. Okay. Then National Board for Wildlife. So what this is also very important statutory body. This is concerned with, like for example, if there is a national park, wildlife sanctuary or tiger reserve, already the boundaries will be fixed, right? Initially when it is created. Suddenly, if you want to increase or decrease the boundary in the area of the national park or tiger reserve, it has to give the approval. And this board will be directly headed by the Prime Minister of India. Very important board, National Board for Wildlife. It is also a statutory body established under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. National Board for Wildlife generally gives approval. Okay, in case if you want to alter the area surrounding a national park, wildlife sanctuary, or tiger reserve. Who can create national park, wildlife sanctuary, and tiger reserve? It is state government. Okay, so state government initially will identify. Right. So first thing understand, national park can be created for conservation of one particular fauna or species. Right. Wildlife sanctuary will be normally not for one particular species, but for conservation of entire ecosystem. Wildlife sanctuary called. The tiger reserves, for conservation of tigers and all. So in case if state government feels the need to demarcate anything as a national park or wildlife sanctuary, generally it initially gives permission, or you can say it will generally give, like I want to do this and what the proposal will be forwarded to Ministry of Environment. Then in case if it is a tiger reserve, it will be forwarded to National Tiger Conservation Authority, or only if it is a national park and wildlife sanctuary, Environment Ministry will have the Chief Wildlife Warden, who is the highest IFS officer will be there. So he will take a call, right? Then he'll give the approval. After giving the approval from the center, the state government issues notification that I am going to establish a particular national park or wildlife sanctuary from this particular area, in this particular area, this much extent and all, it will be notified. Once if it is notified, from then it will be a national park and wildlife sanctuary. Suddenly, if they wanted to decrease the area, they cannot do so. They have to take permission from National Board for Wildlife. Okay, so any increase or decrease area, they have to. Then Central Pollution Control Board. This is also a statutory body. UPSC already have asked a question on this. Central Pollution Control Board was established initially under Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, Water Act you can say, of Pollution Act, 1974. Water Act was passed in 1974. Okay, it was passed in 1974 as a statutory body. But later on, it was only initially concerned with water pollution. Later on in 1980s, it was even this was created in CPCB was created in 2000 only. Okay, but when it was created under Water Act, later on it was given powers under Air Act also. Air Act, Air Pollution Act 1981 also was given under the CPCB supervision. That means Central Pollution Control Board now can deal with water pollution related cases, air pollution related cases. So this is one regulatory body. Any pollution, CPCB is the thing. Then Wildlife Crime Control Bureau. So if any wildlife is getting you can say poached or illegally traded and all, so they will be monitoring. Again under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. This is a statutory body, right? So any trade, if it happens. Then National Biodiversity Authority. This is also a statutory body established under Biodiversity Act of 2002. At the international level, you have UNCBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. Okay, so this is international law. To comply this, we had a domestic law called Biodiversity Authority Act of 2002. So this has created three bodies: National Biodiversity Authority, State Biodiversity Authority, and District Biodiversity Authority. So here the Prime Minister will be the chairman, here the Chief Minister, here the District Magistrate will be the chairman. Three-tier structure was created under this to conserve the biodiversity. Then National Green Tribunal. It was created under National Green Tribunal Act of 2010. What is tribunal? To deal with specific cases, to fasten the cases related. Okay, specific cases will be referred to specific tribunal. Environment related cases will be referred to National Green Tribunal. It was established in 2010 as a statutory body under National Green Tribunal Act. So why I have discussed all these bodies is, if you have seen, every body is having only one specific task. But with respect to overall environment, do we have any one regulatory body? That's the main question. That is the recently Supreme Court said, to conserve environment, which is becoming more challenging in the recent times, you need to have a uniform regulator. Regulator in the sense, for example, if you take telecommunications, you have TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. For insurance, you have IRDAI, Insurance Regulatory Development Authority of India, Pension Fund Regulatory Authority, RBI for banks we have. Like it for all the things we have one central regulator. But for environment, why don't we have one central regulator? That's a question recently Supreme Court have asked, right? So for that reason only this topic was given. So that's the main thing. Okay, so recently Supreme Court has examined the need for permanent environment regulator. So all these are having regulatory powers but with specific purpose only, right? That's the main thing. Background, if you see, in the early, in 2024 only, the central government has notified that they are going to create. That is also after the order of Supreme Court. In 2023, Supreme Court has issued an order. You try to create a permanent environment regulator. When it was ordered by the Supreme Court, central government has issued a notification. With respect to that only, now Supreme Court is going to examine, right? So this is a very important case in environment. KN Godavarman versus Union of India case. So what has happened in this case is, with respect to definition of forest, right? So in this case, what government tried to say is, whatever the land that is designated as forest has to only be considered under the definition of forest. But what Supreme Court said is, dictionary definition of forest has to be followed. Dictionary definition means, what is dictionary forest definition of forest? Anything covered with dense trees, okay, having some flora and fauna can be considered as a forest. But what is the government's logic? Only on the revenue records of the government, if it is listed as a forest land, that only will be considered as forest. Okay, so then it was the first time landmark judgment given, because if you say according to the government logic, lot of land which is actually having the characteristics of forest will not be labeled as forest land and government will divert it. Yes or no? They'll say only government land is a forest land, right? All other rest of the forest land will not be marked as forest land, right? They can easily divert it. But what Supreme Court said is, you have to go with dictionary definition. You cannot go with the government definition of the forest. So very important case. So in 2002 this was issued. Then what is the reason? Currently if you see whatever the central empowered committee we have, that is only ad hoc board. Ad hoc means temporary. It is created for one particular issue. After looking into that issue, it was again going off. Right now, we wanted to be a permanent body. Then, if you see the role, what happened is earlier when this was constituted two times so far. One is with respect to Kaziranga Tiger Reserve, when the land of this particular tiger reserve was encroached and they wanted to divert this land. The Central Empowered Committee was constituted and they have suggested you cannot divert the land. That is one case. And there is also one Mollam Goa project. So this is with respect to hydropower electricity generation. At the point of time also, this Central Empowered Committee was constituted and it said you cannot divert the forest land for any hydropower projects and all. So in these two instances only it was created as ad hoc body, temporary. Like ad hoc committees in parliament, which were created for the time being and then once if it serves the purpose, it will vanish. Same way, right? But now Supreme Court is asking for these things you cannot have an ad hoc body, you need a permanent body. Then what is the need that Supreme Court has highlighted? First thing, if you see, these are all the regulatory bodies for one particular field. We need to have a central body. That's the main thing. And what are the concerns if you see? If you create a regulatory body, who will be controlling the regulatory body? It is the government only again. So in most of the cases also government will be the litigant, right? How can it decide with respect to cases when government is also part? That's the main question. So when the regulatory body is trying to see the different cases, in which most of the cases central government will also be the party, can it take a decision against the central government? Will it have that much power? If they take a decision, they'll immediately remove the person who is actually there in the board or committee, right? So that's the main thing. So whether they can act like a government authority or not is a question. Then independence issues, that is what I told. Whether they can be independent or not is a question. So these are the multiple existing bodies. Then what is the need? As I told you, all these bodies were fragmented. That means they are specified or they were having specific objectives only. They are not having uniform things. At the same time, limited jurisdiction is also there. National Board for Wildlife only with respect to territorial things involved. Tiger conservation only tiger conservation. So this is also limited jurisdiction. In complexity of challenges, the recent times we have climate change is becoming more complex and unpredictable. In those challenging situations also we need the regulatory authority. And accountability and transparency also has to be ensured. You cannot cut down the forest and you cannot say we are getting that developed and all. So there has to be some accountability when you are doing certain acts, right, from the side of the government. And you also need to align national policies with international rules. So when you are adhering to the Paris Agreement, such international conventions and all, you need also to have national laws that are complying under Article 253 of Indian Constitution. So then, next article we have is Prevention of SC/ST Atrocities Act. So with respect to one judgment recently, what Supreme Court said is, so SC/ST Atrocities Act we have, right? So first thing we have to keep in mind, if any person, okay, makes any derogatory marks or insulting approach towards SC and STs, he will be charged under this particular act, right? But what Supreme Court recently said is, if any person is making any insult and that was not intentional, then you cannot fall it under SC/ST atrocities, right? For this, what is the most important thing you have to keep in mind is, the persons against whom you are going to charge under this case have to be non-SC and ST. Okay, if the person is from SC community and the person who have insulted is also from SC community, this law will not at all apply. This will apply only to those who are non-SC and non-STs. If they make any derogatory remarks or insulting remarks against SC/STs, then only this will apply, right? So recently Supreme Court said this will not apply to those in case if they are not directly the insults. See, every remark you make against a person of SC/ST cannot be in an insulting way. But if you just say anything, and if they say I am going to file a case on SC/ST Atrocities Act, so it is violation of your freedom of speech and expression, right? So most of the times. So in those situations also, not only this, previously also once Supreme Court said clearly that once it has said like whenever a person from SC/ST comes to the police station and says that I am going to file a case against this person because he made this remark against me and all. So immediately police generally will file a case. But at that point of time in 2018, I remember what Supreme Court said is you cannot immediately file a case. First, find out, investigate it whether that person whatever he said is actually true or not. You just find it out, then file a case. That's the judgment. Okay. So at that point of time, SC/ST communities have again said that it's not a fair thing and all. Immediately, central government has passed an amendment saying the same thing will apply, not the Supreme Court judgment. Okay. So in that way, they are trying to safeguard this. Again, vote bank politics and all, right? That's a different thing. But first thing, we need to understand the background. So, after the Indian Constitution coming into force, we have an Article 17 which is abolishing the untouchability, but at the same time, fundamental rights sometimes are self-implementary. At the same time, sometimes they require backing of the law also, right? For one, we have this Untouchability Abolition Act, Offences Act of 1955. So it was actually passed in the year in 1955 to prevent any acts of untouchability. But later it was renamed as Protection of Civil Rights Act. Same act it was renamed. It seems to be somewhat vague in the sense and all. That's the reason they have renamed it as Protection of Civil Rights Act in 1976. So almost for many years it was existing like same. But later on it was not getting properly implemented. For that reason, they have removed this and they have passed this another law in their place, that is SC Atrocities Act of 1989. Right? See here, what is the main objective of the law is to protect the people from social disabilities. What are social disabilities? Denial of access to certain places. If you restrict any person of SC/ST community, or any passage, or personal atrocities like forceful drinking or eating of any inedible food, or sexual exploitation, injury, atrocities affecting properties, malicious prosecution, political disabilities, or if you're not allowing a person to file his nomination or anything, or economic exploitation, bonded labor, etc. Right? If any of these are committed, then it is a violation of SC/ST Atrocities Act. Then this act is in place to deliver justice to the marginalized, right? So because at that point of time, when the constitution is coming in force and all, SC/STs are the most vulnerable sections, right? At that point of time, we have given some benefits in the form of affirmative actions also, reservations and all, to uplift them from the social disabilities. So, but now it has taken a different picture because these persons at that point of time are suffering from fear, violence and all. They are not having any life with proper respect and all at that point of time. For that reason, it was brought. So, if you see the provision, this applies only to acts which are committed by non-SC and non-STs against SC/STs. If SC/ST commits against ST/ST, it will not apply. Only if non-SC people commit, then only it will come into this act. Then if you see, this was amended in 2015 to make it more effective and more giving more easy justice and redressal mechanism to the victims. It was amended in 2015. It will not come. Both are covered under the same law, SC and ST. Okay? We cannot say so. Okay? Okay. So then if you see, even there is a provision of establishment of special courts also, exclusively to try the cases related to SC and STs, okay, atrocities and all. Recent observations is, in this particular case, what Supreme Court said is, intent matters. Intent means, for what reason he made that remark, that intention matters, right? So you cannot just simply file a case against that particular person by just citing a remark. What is actual intention behind that particular remark has to be tested. That's the main thing Supreme Court has said. In caste-based humiliation, in case if it is involving any caste affiliation remark only, then you have to file a case under SC/ST atrocities. Otherwise, if it is a personal remark without again referring the caste involved, it doesn't qualify under this particular act. Then insults or intimidation can occur without the reference to caste, right? So most of the times they can just have personal conflict and all without referring anything to caste and all. In case if you're not touching the caste, this law will not again protect you. Then Anticipatory bail. Anticipatory bail means, right. So that means even before getting arrested, if you apply for bail, that is under section 438 of CRPC. You need not remember. But what happens is, in bailable offences, anyhow you will get bail, right? In non-bailable offences only, once if you are arrested in non-bailable offence, it is not easy to come out. In those situations only, a person will apply for anticipatory bail, right? In non-bailable offences also, there is a provision of getting bail, like if the person is not actually charged, correct, or if there is any illness, health and all, right? So there are certain situations like old age person, women again, okay, they're entitled to get anticipatory bails. So what they said is, you cannot deny anticipatory bail for the persons who are actually charged under ST atrocities. Generally, according to the law, this is a non-bailable offence. If any person is booked under ST atrocities, it is non-bailable offence. So it is not easy to deny that person anticipatory bail. That is what Supreme Court said. Means you have to grant him anticipatory bail. Okay, it cannot be denied. That's what the Supreme Court has said. Anticipatory bail. This is under CRPC, not Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Samhita, BNSS, right? That section number changes. That provision is still there. Okay. Then coming to the prelims facts, we have one recent approval of the program called by Union Cabinet is Vignan Dara scheme. Okay. So this was recently approved by Union Cabinet. Vignan means what? Science, right? So this scheme is trying to enhance the research with respect to science, innovation and all. So in examination point of view, you need to know which particular nodal agency is implementing this. It is DST, Department of Science and Technology under Ministry of Science and Technology, right? So it is a central sector scheme. What is central sector scheme? I told you, 100% funding from the center. States have no role in this. Then what are the main things that are being brought under the scheme? Science and technology institutional and human capacity will be enhanced. Then research and development will be encouraged in SNT. Innovation, technology and deployment will be there, right? So these are the three things that will be focused upon. So how much is the money that was given? 10,579 crore was given under 15 Finance Commission from 21 to 25-26 period, right? So benefit of merger. Recently 5 schemes which are implementing these got merged into one scheme with the name Vignan Dara, right? It has got a new form. So mainly is to increase efficiency in fund utilization. When you have 5 schemes and 5 allocations, it's not that easy. When they have same objective, so they have clubbed all this into single program. Then to promote S&T capacity building in research, innovation and technology, this also helps us. Then next important article is classical language status, right? So what is the reason is, recently 4 languages especially, you can see here, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam and Odia, right? So they were added to the list of this classical languages under the Central Institute of Indian Language. Okay, they were establishing certain, you can say, special centers, you can say, under this particular organization to have more research and more fund allocation to classical languages. So first you need to understand what is this institute and under whose supervision it could fall under. First thing is, why we need special centers for classical languages, right? So when we have language, it needs to be protected also under which article? 29 of Indian Constitution, right? Right to conserve your own language, culture with respect to linguistic and religious minorities. It covers both. 29. 30 only talks about religious minorities. Right to establish educational institutions of their own choice. Right? 30. So these two will apply only to Indians or foreigners also. 29 and 30. Only Indians. What are other articles that apply? 15, 16, 19, 29, 30. Okay, very good. So, need for autonomous special centers is financial independence. Autonomous itself. Okay. So, remember, certain institutions or agencies have autonomous status. Autonomous means they don't have any supervision by any department. They can function independently in financial domain. Operational capacity also will be independent. Okay. With respect to sometimes you'll be seeing deemed universities in education. What are deemed universities? They're not under any university control. They'll have complete financial freeness. They can take how many admissions they want. Their own governance mechanism will be there. So that is what the concept of autonomous. So here also, when you are having special autonomous centers for these languages, you can have more financial independence, more operational flexibility, improved governance, and comparison also will be there. This Tamil language center was established way before than all these things. Okay, so this was separate institute, and we have for Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, and Odia. These four are getting added to one institute. So what is this Central Institute of Indian Language? So it was established under Ministry of Education. Don't get confused, it is not under culture. Ministry of Education, right? So especially in 1969 it was established to, and under Mysore it was established. Okay, so at Mysore it promotes Indian languages and conserving the languages is the main job here. Most important thing is this. So how many classical languages we have in India? 6. What are those? Tamil, Sanskrit, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Odia. Odia is the recent entry. First one is Tamil, right? Only language other than Southern Indian language is Sanskrit. Okay, English is not part of classical languages. And all these 6 are the part of 8th schedule of Indian Constitution. You know, 8th schedule originally had 14, now it had 22, right? So which part deals with 8th schedule? Part 17 of Indian Constitution deals with 8th schedule, official languages. Part 17. Part 18 talks about emergency. Part 20, amendment of the Constitution, right? How many parts are there? 22, 25. Number 25. Number of parts? 25. But numbering is there till 22 only. That's what you are going to say. Oh, great. How many articles are there? 395 numbered articles. Total number of articles? 467. Okay. How many amendments are there? 106. How many pages there in the Constitution of India? Why? This question will come in 25 examination for sure. Count it tomorrow, okay? Hey, how can you make? Right? So, see, we have 6 languages as classical languages. Then what is the criteria to fall under this classical languages? It needs to be antiquate, okay? So almost 15 to 2000 years old it should be original, not borrowed, and it should have some heritage associated with it, okay? So some ancient texts also should be there, it should be very distinct. So once if it falls under these 3 criteria, it will be marked as classical language, right? So what will happen if it is marked as classical language? It can have some centers established for conservation, promotion of that language and all. At the same time, UGC also can start some courses in that particular language, right? So some benefits will be there if it is a classical language. And you know, if it is falling under classical language, even Sangeet Natak Academic and Sahitya Academies and all, they'll be giving that awards also for the languages that are written under this. Okay? So this is the main thing, benefits of having under classical language. And you know, 8th schedule of Indian Constitution talks about official languages. So part 17 talks about this from 343 to 351. And these are all the 22 languages there. And you know, originally we have 14 only. 8 got added later on. These 8 are those. Sindhi 1967 by 21st Constitutional Amendment, right? Then you have Konkani, Manipuri, Nepali, 71st Constitutional Amendment in the year 1992. Then we have Bodo, Dogri, Maithili, Santali in the year 1990, 2003, 92nd Constitutional Amendment. Okay, so 3 amendments were made, and how many? 8 languages got added. Okay, 4 ones, 3 ones, and 1. Okay, so the amendments can also be asked. Do remember. Okay, Sindhi is 21st Amendment. These are 71st Amendment, and this is by 92nd Amendment. Right, and do remember, English is not part of 22 official languages. Okay, that can be a trap. Then next topic we have is microplastics, right? So who are all eating daily non-veg and fishtarians, okay, be cautious because inside fish also these microplastics are recently found. Okay, So, and even microplastics are even found in human brains also because of easy penetrating capacities, okay, because of its very small size. If you degrade this plastic bottle, you can see slowly in that way it is entering into our plates because microplastic is one which can be considered of size from 1 millimeter to 1 micrometer, small size. Because of its small size, it is even passing the filtration capacities also. It is entering into the food chain. Once if it enters into the food chain, what happens? You know, plastics are made up of petrol only, right? They're synthetic petroleum products and all. Called we have these plastics made from. It is also bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Bioaccumulation means once if you take any such chemical or harmful chemical into your body, and if it is confined in one particular organism only, we call bioaccumulation. But if fish eats, if it is there only inside a fish, we call accumulation. But from the fish, if it transfers to the human, right, when that person eats that fish, it is called biomagnification. When it is transferring from one to another, biomagnification. So that's the main problem. It is becoming not only a threat for ecosystem or the environment in terms of pollution, but it is also causing some trouble to the human health. So it was observed that recently microplastics were observed. Okay, so to even reach the human brains, so easily they're getting entered into the human body. So what is the microplastic? Less than 1 millimeter to 1 micrometer size, and easily they're getting because fragmentation of large plastics. Because you know plastics are not degradable, non-biodegradable, right? For that reason, and this is a main problem in terms of health. Then if you see danger that they pass is they are passing through the filtration process or treatment process and all because of the small size, and they're entering into the food chain. Then even they're impacting the wildlife, especially fish. Then they can also kill the biodiversity. They can also stunt the growth and the behavior of different fauna and organisms. Right? Then what are the measures that you need to do? Especially microplastics, if you see, they're available in the form of microbeads, in scrubs, you know, in cosmetics also, in toothpaste, right? So in surf and all these things also, we're finding small beads. Those beads are nothing but microplastics, right? So we need to impose a ban on these things, right? Because there is a high good chance of entering into the food chain once if they're again in the process. Then countries also should cooperate. What's the main problem is almost if you see in India we almost have 70 million tons of plastic generated every day, and it is expected that this particular waste generation will almost double, or you can say not double, also four times it will increase by 2050. What is the current plastic use? That will almost increase by four times by 2050. That is one estimate, right? So you can understand how much is the intensity, right? But what you can do, we have no law that is currently dealing with plastic pollution at the international level nor at the national level. So we need to bring a plastic treaty also, which is strictly enforcing one particular provision. So in terms of uses of the plastic and all. Why? Because if you see in the recent times also central government, okay, so it said like we are trying to phase out all the single-use plastics, SUPs by 2022, right? So but how much is the enforcement to all? It is widely available anywhere in the market, right? Plastic, single-use plastics and all. So what is most important in these things is they need to be law, they need to be stringent regulatory mechanism also. If anyone is found to use plastics or whichever the things that are banned, you need to impose some penalties also, right? At the same time, people also should change their lifestyles or practices, right? They need to use some environmentally sustainable alternatives, right? So that has to be the solution all the time. And if you see in the year 2022 also, UN has demarcated its Environment Day on June 5th as the theme at the point of time in June 5th, 2022 was Beat the Plastic Pollution. So you can understand if it is making this as a theme, how much is the intense problem that the world is suffering. So these things you can write. Okay? So now global plastic pollution treaty is also on the cards. Discussions are going on. We don't know when it will be finalized. But most importantly, it is we who have to change our behavior, attitude towards this usage of plastic. Then next coming to another topic is Gomti. Gomti River that was in news because recently Bangladesh has accused India that because of India releasing water from one particular dam, okay, on which this Gomti River is going to, so So because of that only there were floods in Bangladesh. That was allegation, right? So before that we see here. So these are the rivers that you have in Gangetic Plain and as well as Brahmaputra Plain. But first here you need to understand Gomti River. So this river is flowing to Tripura, right? It is originating in Tripura and from there it is entering into Bangladesh, right? It is meeting there Meghna River. Meghna is a combined form of Ganga and Brahmaputra, right? So then it is meeting Meghna River and then finally discharging into the Bay of Bengal, right? What is allegation is on this river there is a hydroelectric power project constructed, and when this water from this dam or flood is actually flooding now, because of that only Bangladesh was flooded. That was the main allegation. But what India said, it is not because of water released from Indian side. We already have alerted the low-lying areas, but there is more flow in the river, so that is not in Indian control. So India doesn't have any role in this particular thing. That's the Indian stand. So recently, Ministry of External Affairs denied that floods in Bangladesh were not caused by this Dambo Dam from the Gumti River, okay, which is there in Tripura. So first thing, what is all? When something is having international relevance, that has to be focused upon, right? Gomti River is one of the tributary of Ganges also we have, right? So this is also one river, but in Tripura. So this is originating in Tripura, right? And if you see, this is a transboundary river. Transboundary means which flows through boundary of two countries, right? So in India and Bangladesh point of view, if you see, almost 54 are transboundary rivers, right? And such examples I have given here. Ganges is a transboundary river which flows through two countries. Teesta river we have discussed on the previous class also. Teesta. It originates in Sikkim, flows through West Bengal and then enters into Bangladesh, right? Then Feni river is also one river between India and Bangladesh. Then you have Kushiara. This is a tributary of Barak river. Then Brahmaputra river. Then finally Meghna. Like this we have totally 54 rivers between India and Bangladesh which are transboundary, right? So one such river is this Gumti river also. Then we have Lumi. Okay. So what is its speciality is this has been the first India's first hybrid reusable rocket. Okay. Hybrid reusable rocket. Hybrid in the sense that it is using multiple fuels. But most importantly, these things can be asked from factual point of view. It was not developed by ISRO or any agency. It was a private agency. Okay, startup you can call Space Zone India. Okay, it has developed this Lumi 1, which is India's first reusable hybrid rocket. What is the objective here then? To advance research on climate change. Okay, collect data more from the atmosphere related UV radiation, air quality, and all. So that's the main objective. And as part of this satellite or launch vehicle, you can say, rocket or launch vehicle, we have sent some CubeSats and PicoSats. Okay, CubeSats means small size. Okay, small. Pico also very small size satellites were sent. So you can see 3 and 50 PicoSats were sent. What is the main aim? To make it more sustainable. Why sustainable? Reusable. Okay. So as the rocket which was launched is a reusable, means you can use it again for another launch. That is right. Now what is the objective and aim? You can see it is trying to make space missions more sustainable as well as innovative and cost effective. When you're reusing it, you can also save money, cost effective, right? That's the main thing. Then next you have is Manager 1. So what is this? Recently NASA. Okay. So in collaboration with SpaceX Falcon 9 satellite, what it have done is it has launched this particular satellite. What is the main objective? To track about methane and greenhouse gas emissions, right? So that's the main thing. Methane, you know, CH4, it is a greenhouse gas along with carbon dioxide emissions also. So what is the main thing is, so in the atmosphere or in the environment, okay, so how much is the methane emissions? Because every day if you see methane related emissions are increasing in the atmosphere, right? Methane has become a potent greenhouse gas and it is a short living pollutant, SLP. Short living pollutant means it cannot stay in the atmosphere like other pollutants for long. Carbon dioxide has a lifespan of many years, but methane has a lifespan of only 14 days maximum, right? Short living pollutant we call it, right? Then what is the source for methane? Majorly paddy fields, then solid waste management also, animal rumination also, right? And the ruminate also, methane will be released from the atmosphere, also from the sources. Then refrigerants from natural sources, agriculture, and what is worrying thing is this methane is not only becoming a primary pollutant, it is also creating a situation for secondary pollutant like ozone. Right? You know what is the concept of primary and secondary pollutant? Primary pollutant means which is directly released in that form into the atmosphere. But when primary pollutants react with other things, it will form into secondary pollutants. Secondary pollutants are not directly created, right? Not directly available. When primary pollutants react, for example, how ozone means stratospheric ozone is good, right? And you know tropospheric ozone is a pollutant, right? How tropospheric ozone, which is a pollutant, is created when volatile organic compounds, VOC we call, and nitrous oxide compounds and all, when they react with each other in the presence of sunlight, then ozone will be created, which is a harmful pollutant, and it is then in the troposphere. That means it is not created directly naturally. Only when two pollutants react in the presence of sunlight or in some conditions, then only this ground level ozone will be created. Very important, this is a secondary pollutant, not a primary pollutant. Then last topic, not last but one you can say, we have Botswana, right? So why Botswana? Recently, second largest diamond was found in Botswana. So these things can be asked, right? So almost 2,492 carat diamond was found, right? Carat purity will, so carat is a metric for purity of the diamond, right? So previously we have almost 3,106 carat diamond that was unearthed in Canada, on Canadian company in South Africa. So what actually happens is diamond, like diamonds have to be mined from the interior, right? When you study in geography about the interior of the earth, we'll be studying about direct sources, indirect sources. And direct sources we have volcanism, right? We also have this mining also. But when we mine, we cannot go deep into the earth because of the increase in temperature and pressure deep inside the earth, right? That's the reason. Then, if you see what is diamond and where it is naturally found, diamonds will be naturally found in mantle, right? Crust, mantle, and core, right? So these are the layers. So this will be normally present in mantle. Inside mantle only you have this magma, which is a source of volcanic eruptions. Like when magma is coming out, it will create different types of landforms. And this magma will create two types of structures, like dike and sills. Sills are horizontal things. For example, if lava is trickling like this, it creates a landform called sill, horizontal. Dike is vertical. Okay, so in these landforms which are created by volcanic eruptions, generally diamonds will be there. So from the mantle you have to mine it, right? That's the availability of diamond, right? Then in India where do we have diamond mines? Panna Diamond Belt, Madhya Pradesh. Then even in Anantapur district also recently it was observed. Then Kimberley Belt in Andhra Pradesh, Anantapur district. Then Krishna Basin of Andhra Pradesh also had some diamond resources, right? So in recent times in Karnataka also some diamond mines were found, right? Then coming to global producers, who is having the largest resources of diamonds is Botswana. Okay, in terms of resources, it is Botswana. In terms of production, it is Canada. Okay, in India, Surat is the largest processor of diamonds. They process the diamonds and all, refine and all. And if you see by volume, who is going to produce more diamonds by volume is, it is Russia, right? Like this, we have certain countries in diamond production and all. So, coming to location of Botswana, it is a landlocked country. You can see here, it is landlocked. Okay, that doesn't have any outlet to sea or ocean. Landlocked. Okay. Producing అంటే వాళ్ళు ఎక్కువ ప్రొడ్యూస్ చేస్తున్నారు వాల్యూమ్ సైజ్ వైజ్ చూస్తే అది ప్రొడక్షన్ రేట్ చూస్తే కెనడా how many sequence, okay, units wise are. Botswana is a landlocked country in southern Africa, you can see, and here borders of this. Okay, it's very important not only because of this, and in the recent times also it was in news because of elephant trade and all. Right, trophy killing is famous in Africa. Because of that also it was in news. So then in Kalahari Desert is also there in Botswana region only, and It is also part of Okavango Delta. Okavango River flows through this Botswana and all. These are important from examination point of view. And for your information, it is considered to be elephant capital of the world. Right? So why I have mentioned this fact is ivory killing is so famous in elephant trade and all, right? So for ivory, they'll be killing and all. So for trophy hunting is one thing which generally will be followed in Africa. So in the recent times, many environmentalists have expressed their concerns because, see, for elephant ivory and all, if you kill the elephants which are so abundant in your country, anytime elephants may become extinct, right? For that reason, they have alarmed situation is in worst in Botswana and all. In the name of trophy hunting, they're killing more animals, right? So that's a thing which we have to concern about. The last topic we have is Lakpati Didi initiative. Okay. So what is the main objective is here the Prime Minister has launched this scheme to ensure that women, okay, so through different livelihood options, especially in the rural areas, they'll be earning certain amount on average every month, like minimum 10,000 rupees, which is sustainable. Sustainable in the sense, not only for few months, it has to be in continuation, right? So in that way, we are trying to empower the women. So this is part of different schemes like Deen Dayal Upadhyay, National Rural Livelihood Mission and all. So we have launched this scheme and it was found recently that so many, like especially you can see most of the women, they're able to get an annual sustainable income of 1 lakh rupees. Annual sustainable means more than 10,000 at least they're getting per month. Okay. So when they'll be assessing this is at least for 4 agriculture seasons. If any woman, if she is consistently getting 10,000 or more per month, okay, then she will be said like this person is getting under Lakpati Didi. Okay, so in that way, the government will be providing those opportunities for the women, and the women will be doing those things, and they'll be employing, they'll get that particular money by creating some employment opportunities also. So this is the main program to uplift the women in the rural areas, right? So by providing certain things, and this is under Deen Dayal Upadhyay, or you can say Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, National Rural Livelihoods Mission, launched in 2006 in under Ministry of Rural Development, and to diversify livelihood activities. Okay, so many things will be launched here, like craft making, pickles, food items, and many things. Okay, stitching, different things will be planned. So mainly focus will be on self-help goods, Dwapras type of concept, right? So that is the main objective. And recently, government also said we are trying to increase the persons who will fall under this particular scheme to cover more, so that women also gets empowered financially and socially, right? That's the main objective of this scheme. So here that's the main target that government said we want to extend this to at least 1 crore more. Already 3 crores are brought under this scheme. Now we wanted to extend this to 3 more crore, 1 more crore. Okay, so that's the main thing. So I have completed 5 minutes before only. So safeguard. Like it will be on like a I'm sitting on a time bomb. Completing current affairs, especially in 2 hours of time, right? It's a big task even for me also. Any doubts now? Ad hoc. Ad hoc means temporary. Permanent means it will be there for long, anytime. Okay. Ad hoc bodies will be created only for one time. After the purpose is served, that body will vanish. It will not be there. Self-help group means see, like if you want to start any industry, you have only 5,000 rupees. You cannot start on your own. But if you have your friends all who are having the same idea, all they can pool up their money. Every person 5,000, 10,000 combinedly, you have 1 lakh gathered, right? That is what self-help group. You will only help yourself by forming a group. Any other questions? Those who want to leave, you can. That's what I say. State government, if it wants to increase or decrease, it has to say that to the National Board of Wildlife, right? We have seen NBW. They will give the final call. Anything, any geographical alteration has to be approved by National Board for Wildlife. That's the National Board for Wildlife. No? National Board for Wildlife is headed by the Prime Minister. right? Why? Because see, for example, in the present times, okay, if you have demarcated 100 kilometers as a national park or wildlife sanctuary, later your needs will increase. You want to shrink that 100 kilometers to 60 kilometers, right? Any government will try to do that only because in the name of development they'll go for voting and all. So that should not happen, right? So that is the reason. If state governments are given power to decrease or increase the area, they'll do it their choice and all. That's the reason central government has kept under their control because they have to maintain the environment also. That's the reason. Cartesian protocol, living modified organisms, no? Genetic modified organisms, which plants or animals, any organism which is modified, gene modification, that is what we call LMUs, that is covered under Cartesian.